هلا بدينا لا معلش، لكن تعدل الغطرة شوية بس. لما أقول بسم الله نبدأ. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Welcome to lecture number 5 in the psycholinguistics course. And today we are going to continue talking about language acquisition, but we're going to focus on developmental stages. If you remember, last week we talked about language acquisition in general, and then we mentioned that there are some steps that we cannot skip, for example. So there are milestones or steps for language acquisition, milestones or stages or steps for language acquisition. And those milestones are universal to all humans. So all humans in the world acquiring any language follow the same, more or less, milestones. And those milestones are called developmental stages, developmental milestones. We are going to look at them one by one. But first of all, we ask ourselves, what's our first experience with language? If you ask anyone, what's your first experience with language? They might say, well, it's when, for example, or when a child produces his or her first words. So his or her first words. But in fact, it goes even beyond that. We have something pre-birth. So before birth, before we are born to 12 months, we have something that is called sensitivity to language. Sensitivity to language, as in hearing. We all know that hearing begins around 18 weeks of gestation, so around 4 months. Children or infants or babies start to develop hearing at the age of 4 months, 18 weeks of gestation, so still before birth. If we divide the whole period of pregnancy to 3 stages, say, so this is stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 divided by months, so around 3 months each. This will be the first trimester. This is the first trimester, second trimester, third trimester. By the third trimester here, the fetus responds to auditory stimulation. What does that mean? So babies start to respond to auditory stimulation. So when you talk to the child child will respond, even though it's before birth. So the fetus inside the womb would respond to auditory stimulation by the third trimester. So from 6 to 9 months, they start to respond to auditory stimulation. And that tells us something, that this is the first experience with language. They are hearing language now and responding to it. Of course, they cannot talk by now, but they respond by moving or whatever. Then 38 weeks old fetuses have preferences for their own mother's voice over that of a stranger. So around just before birth, they prefer their mother's voices to that of strangers, and that tells us that they know that this voice, for example, belongs to the mother or whatever, or this sound is familiar and that stranger's voice is not familiar. All right, and they measured this by looking at the actions, at the movements of the fetus. So it responds differently when the parents or the mother talks versus that when the fetus hears someone else. So this is our first experience with language, more or less. So around that time, pre-birth sensitivity to language, this is our first experience with language. Then, after birth, children recognize their mother language as distinct from other languages. Now, some of you might say, well, is that possible? Do children know languages? How do you know that children know languages? Well, it's still correct. This is correct, but we have an explanation for it. The children actually respond differently to different languages. When you play the first language to the child, they will respond, or their brains will respond differently than responding to another language, so a second or third or a foreign language in general. So the response is different. The response is different when they hear the first language or other languages. Yes, they might not be able to tell you that this is a foreign language, but when you look at the brain, in brain imaging, the brain responds differently to different languages. So when you play the first language, you might see, for example, when it's L1 being, spoken around that child, you can see that the brain is going like that, okay? This is the brain reading. But when it's a foreign language, you might see something like this. That means the brain is not stable. The brain is not stable. It's trying to figure out what's going on. So the children, even though they are still very, very young, they prefer, let's say, the first language. The brains respond differently to the first language than when another language is, being spoken around them. And this is really interesting. That tells us a lot about how the brain works. All right, now after birth, the first 6 months are really, really important for language acquisition and especially speech production. And that is by cooing and gargling. So the children start to coo and gargle, produce those noises, and this is very important because it activates the vocal cords. It helps the child. These are the first sounds that the child produces. So this is at the first 6 months. So from day 1 to 6 months after birth. Then after that, in the second 6 months, or so from 6 to 12 months, this is where babbling takes place. And babbling usually consists of single syllables, as in consonant plus vowel, consonant plus vowel. And the consonant is usually a stop sound. So for example, a stop would be like b. B is a stop, right? It's a stop consonant. And then the vowel is normally a. And that's why, if you think about it, children from 6 to 12 months produce words, or not words, but sounds like ba, ba, or da, da, or ma, ma, for example. Because the first consonant is a stop, ma, ba, da, okay? And then the second is a vowel, a, so ba, ba, ma, ma, and so on. So this is called babbling. This is called babbling. Some people might think that the child is producing words here, but we are going to see in a minute. So the vocalizations have sentence-like intonation. When you hear the child producing those babbling, sometimes you can hear that the child is imitating a sentence intonation. So how do you speak? We speak with intonations. We go up and down. When you ask questions, the intonation is different. like you have a car, like you have a car. So we have different intonations. Children also, when they babble, they imitate intonations or adults' intonation. Then from 12 to 24 months, we have the first word being produced. And this is, of course, controversial, but anyways, controversial, sorry, this is controversial. Yeah, so here we said that children actually produce words or sounds like baba or mama. How come that you say that children produce their first words around 12 months? This is controversial, as I said, but let's think about it. Here, when children say baba or mama or dada or whatever, are they really referring to their mothers and fathers from day one? Or is it that these are the only sounds the child can produce? Many scholars have argued that, well, this is just, these are the sounds that the child can make, and that's why they say baba, mama, or dada, or whatever. But in fact, are they words? Is the child using them as words now? Probably not, because first, the child will be referring to anything as in mama or dada. Sometimes the child will be playing alone and say baba, mama, dada, and so on. So producing those babbling. So the first word is around 12 to 18 months. Maybe the first word would be mama or whatever, but it's not that babbling. Babbling is different from the first word. Now around this time, we have something that is called one-word stage. One-word stage. And this stage is called holophrastic period. Holophrastic period. What do we mean by that? Holophrastic period. When we say holophrastic period, that means the child will be using one word to refer to everything or many things around him. Let's take the word milk, for example. If the child, let's just assume that the child now knows the word milk. The child is going to use the word milk to refer to milk, as in I saw milk, or I want to drink milk, or the cat is drinking milk, or simply to refer to his mother. I want my mother, for example. The child is going to say milk. So the child will use that one word to refer to several things, to serve several sentences. And that's why it's called holophrastic period. Holophrastic period. So using one word to refer to many things. And that leads us to a very, very interesting phenomenon in language acquisition, and that is underextension and overextension. Underextension and overextension. What do we mean by that? Let's break them down into different words, and then they're going to be easier. Extension, you know, when you extend something. So extend, overextend. So you use the same meaning to refer to other things. So you use the same meaning to refer to several things. Let's take this example. The child learns the word dog. For example, the word dog. The next day, the child is watching a movie and there's a horse in the movie. The child says dog, referring to the horse. This is called overextension. Overextension. So it's the same with cats or anything, like water, for example. If the child learns water as something that is liquid, for example, then the child wants milk, but he says water still, or vice versa. So it's extending the meaning to include other things. extending the meaning to refer to several other things. The opposite of that is underextension. For example, flower versus rose. All right, so for example, let's assume that the child now knows the word. Okay, so let's say we have animal. All right, or let's say, for example, rose. Let's take this example that's here. We have roses, flowers. Rose is a flower, of course. Rose is a flower, of course. But then the child is presented with a tulip. You know, tulip is a different kind of flower. The child might know the word rose, flower, but is unable to extend the meaning of flower or rose to the tulip. So the tulip is still a flower, for example. But when you ask that child, what is that? And you present him or her with a tulip, they might not be able to say flower or rose. So they might not extend the meaning flower to the tulip, for example, even though tulip is one type of flowers. That's the same with animals. So take, well, dogs maybe. Dog. So maybe the child associates dog with a big dog in the house. The next day, he or she watches a small dog, but unable to say dog because it's smaller. Sometimes you ask the child, what is that? And he or she is unable to say that. And they might say, I don't know. Even though they know the word dog or animal, but they have something that is called underextension. So failure to extend the meaning to include other related words. I hope that this is clear because it's important and it gives us a lot of indications as to how language works. Now, as the child now learns more and more words, as they reach 50 words, around 50 words, two very interesting things happen. First, that's number one, the child starts putting words together, and that's really interesting. This is the beginning of sentences. The child starts to put words together. Then he or she starts learning new words quickly, and that's what we call vocabulary bursts. So around when the child learns 50 words, two very interesting things happen. Number one, they start putting words together, creating sentences. And this is interesting because the way they do it is different from adults. They just put words in systematic but incorrect ways. Around 6 years old, children roughly know about 8,000 to 14,000 words. And that's a lot. That's a lot. If you think about it, it's like 4 to 8 new words every single day. I'm not saying that in every single day the child learns 4 to 8, but it's average, just average, because around 6 months, 6 years, the child would roughly know 8,000 to 14,000 words. So on average, 4 to 8 new words every day. And that's a lot, isn't it? And remember, we're talking about 6 months, 6 years, so no schooling yet, no schools, because children acquire language implicitly. Remember, implicitly. Knowledge of lexicon, as we said in lecture number 1, knowledge of lexicon, of words, is implicit. It's not explicit. Now, preschool years. Children show knowledge of first language word order, We've talked about that. And then the sentences start to lengthen, to get longer and longer. And how do we know that sentences get longer? It's by something that we call MLU, or mean length of utterances. Mean length of utterances. What is that? How do we measure the length of sentences of children? How do we say that this child is more fluent than that child? We have something that is called mean length of utterance. How do we calculate that? We add free and bound morphemes. We add them together, and then we divide on the number of utterances. And that gives us a number. That number is called MLU, is the measure. If that measure is higher, then the child is more fluent. And sentences are longer. We know that. If MLU is low, then the child is not that fluent. And sentences normally are shorter. And of course, there's a high correlation between MLU and age. What does that mean? Of course, there's a correlation. So as we grow older, MLU also increases. So let's say that this is year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, 5, okay, 6, 7, 8, and so on. So MLU here is maybe 0. Here it will be like 1. Here it will be like 4. Here it will be like 10. So it goes up and up. The sentences get longer and longer. And the child starts to use bound and free morphemes. Right. So this is a sample of a preschooler, someone called Hannah. So no Hannah mess, as you can see. No daddy mess. Where go mom? Mom talk phone. Mommy like it. Want juice. More cracker. Daddy push in swing. Go subby, for example, or subway. Now what do you notice about the speech or language of Hannah, who is 23 months old? First of all, of course you can stop the video and do it yourself and then check your answers with me. But one of the things that we notice is that there is no bound morphemes or tense markers on verbs or plural markers. For example, mom talk. So there should be an S here, right? Or ED. Like it. So it should be an S here. There should be a morpheme here. Want juice. So who wants juice? We don't know if it's someone else. If it's someone else, then we need an S here. Like mom wants juice. Or if it's referring to herself, like I want juice. In that case, there is no subject. We can't see who did what. All right. More cracker. That's an order probably. But overall, there are no bound morphemes or tense markers like past tense ed, or even plural s. No plural s here. And no subjects like here. Want juice. Who wants juice? I want juice. He wants juice. Who? So there is no subject. All right, now at year 3, what do we notice? First of all, sentences gradually lengthen. This is, of course, intuitive. Bound morphemes and function words emerge. This is where we start producing third-person singular s, as in he walks, she walks. Past tense ed, he finished, for example. And then function words also emerge. So the children start using those words. Morphemes, of course, emerge gradually. This is really important, and in a similar order. There were some studies recording children, okay, and how they use the morphemes. And what they found is that most children in those studies acquire morphemes in a similar order. For example, acquiring plural S first, then past tense ed, then, and before that, ing, then possessive S, as in Muhammad's book or Ali's car, things like that S. So possessive S is acquired later. And third person singular S, he walks, she walks, in the middle. And plural S at the very beginning. Isn't that interesting? So it's only an S. It's the same S, plural or on verb or possessive. It's just S, but it's acquired at different stages. And that tells us a lot about how the brain works and how we acquire language, because morphemes emerge gradually and in a similar order. So for example, ing first, then Kitty sleeping, for example, and then plural S, then ing, for example, then third person singular S, we said, and then possessive S. All right, and at the same time, at this time, the use of the morphemes is not correct all the time. At this time, third year, the use of morphemes is not correct all the time. Sometimes we have things like goad. So instead of saying went, the child would say goad. And I talked about that. What is that? Can you explain why children produce words like goad? Well, it's because this is an acquisition strategy, as we said in that lecture. So this is an acquisition strategy. This is an overgeneralization. Instead of waiting till we hear each word in past, present, and future, we just try to make generalizations. This is an acquisition strategy. It makes it easier for us to acquire languages. And if you have mistakes like this, then I know that the brain is doing its job. So here around this time, we have mistakes like goad, like same mistakes with plurals, like sheeps, and so on. Then complex sentences are produced. Okay, complex sentences are produced with variation, of course. So I want mommy do it. So here we have a subject. Before we did not have a subject. Now we have a subject. Like I see you sit down. Watch me draw circles. Things like that. So sentences start to get longer. And of course they become more complex at this time. And then relative clauses also are produced around this time. Around 3 to 4 years old. Now this is really, really important. There's a considerable period between the time a child first uses a form. Form here means S, ed, or plural S, or ing, and so on. So, for example, let's take S, plural S. There's a considerable period between the time the child first uses a word and then consistent use of it. What does that mean? That means when a child first uses S, the next time he might not say plural S. He might skip it, then use it, then skip it, and so on. So there will be a considerable amount of time between the first time the child uses this form and then consistent use of it. So let's say consistent use maybe around 4 years. But the child might start use it like from at the beginning of year 3, maybe. All right? So there will be like 1 year or 2 years maybe until the child learns how to use this morpheme straight away correctly in all contexts. So yes, first of all, when the child starts using a form like ed, that child might not use it all the time correctly. The child is going to spend some time making errors with that ed or with that plural s. And then maybe after 6 months, 7 months, whatever, that the child will be able to use it correctly all the time. At around 5 to 6 years, language becomes more systematic. Around 5 to 6 years, language becomes systematic. So consistent, correct all the way, or more systematic. Systematic as in no variation. So at the beginning, from day 1 to around 4 and something, language is variable. Sometimes the child uses the form, sometimes the child does not use the form. But around 5, 6, language becomes more systematic. Then, after that, the last stages, 7 to 8 and 9 years, what happens around this time? The children start to use derivational morphemes, as in happiness, this ness here. For example, beautiful, this full, and meant, as in government. These are called derivational morphemes, and the child starts using the morphemes on different words around 7, 8, and 9 years old. Of course, we don't expect a child who is 1 or 2 years to invent new words or come up with words with, helpfulness or, for example, government or things like this. So these morphemes are acquired later. Derivational morphemes are acquired later. So first functional morphemes like plural s, third person singular s, ed, these are acquired first. And then we have derivational morphemes around 7, 8, and 9 years at that time. After that, discourse ability and metalinguistic awareness develop as children grow older. This is, of course, well known. Discourse ability, metalinguistic awareness. So knowledge, metalinguistic awareness, that is knowledge or awareness about knowledge. Awareness and knowledge about language. Knowledge about language. So they know, for example, some of the forms like ed or and so on. All the morphemes. This is called metalinguistic awareness. If you have knowledge about language. This is only one example, and again, I'm going to give you more details about that later. And then discourse ability. Let's take this example of discourse ability. If someone calls home and the child picks up, the speaker says, "Where's your father?" The child might say, "Well, my father is in the bedroom, in his bedroom." All right? But after many years or after some years, the same person calls, the child picks up, the speaker says, "Where's your father?" And the child says, "1 minute." And then he goes or she goes and call their father. Right? Why? Because now they know that the speaker is not interested in knowing where the father is. They just want to talk to him. This is called discourse ability. So these are acquired later as children grow older. And of course, this is obvious. This is general. That's it for today's lecture. I'd like to thank you again and again for following the presentations, and I hope that you find them and that you found them easy to follow and understand. If you have some questions, always you can ask me in the live session or by email, and I will be happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much, and see you in lecture number 6. Assalamu alaikum.